Okay, so now moving on to item 9, Christchurch Northern Corridor Downstream Effects Project. Is there any commentary from staff on this matter before we move into questions?
We can move straight to questions, Chair.
Okay, let's move straight to questions.
Perhaps staff could give an outline of how the community board's meeting went and the recommendations from that, because there was a couple of changes.
So
Thank you.
The community board had a meeting Monday a week ago where they heard a large number of submissions, and there was some debate and some questions, and then met again on Friday. We talked through the proposal. The information that's coming through from the community is there are already substantial issues with rat running through local streets, speeding and other concerns from the community, and difficulty crossing Cranford Street, which the proposal that staff have put forward looks to address. It looks to address the community concerns that have been raised around pedestrian access and providing options for travel. The community board resolved on Friday to, excuse me, Chair, sorry, completely lost my train of thought. The community board resolved on Friday to accept all of the recommendations from staff, however not resolve the activity of the section of road between Innes Road and Berwick Street. So not resolve the clearway, to wait for a future date to do more work on the TDM measures that we're doing in conjunction with NZTA, Waimakariri District Council. So is that enough of a...
Yep, all right, thank you. Any further questions? Pauline.
I've got a couple, and I'm sorry, I'm very, very concerned about Courtney Street, because Courtney Street is a little tiny, I don't know, how long is it, maybe 100 metres or something, runs between Westminster and Trafalgar. And it was up for renewal in 2010, but post-quake it's been deferred. I think you're saying it's on schedule for 10 years, but you're saying that the curb and channelling is working very well, even though it's deep dish. However, I'm concerned that Courtney Street is a casualty and it's going to actually become more dangerous. I think we heard through the submissions that it's very dangerous. There's a lot of school children around there because it's between the two entrances of the school. There's a lot of speeding already. It's very narrow. By the time you get cars parking on each side, there's just enough room. It's had the roundabout at one end removed because of the cycleway, the Papanui parallel going through there, and the other end's had some treatment that's dubious whether it's better or worse. So what can we put in place to address the residents, particularly along there, and the school children, rightly concerned about the safety and the up-and-coming increased effects Courtney Street is going to have from this whole northern corridor?
So one of the parallel pieces of work that's going on but not included in this report is a safe access to school study across a number of schools in the area, including St Albans School. That study is underway. What we've done is include in the scope of that work to look at the function of Courtney Street, particularly around school drop-off and pick-up times, but to give us some general comments as well, to see whether there's anything we can do. At the moment, Courtney Street, from a pavement perspective, is functioning okay, pavement and drainage perspective. There would be quite a significant asset write-off if we did take it. There are others in the network that are far worse that need replacing. So as we've discussed in previous meetings, the priority for street renewals we are trying to keep as condition-based. We will keep a very close eye on it, but what we will do is put it in the scope of the safe access to schools, because it is on the boundary of St Albans School and it does carry a lot of school traffic, so we accept that that's an issue, and to figure out whether there's anything we can do, that would have to come back through the community board if there was additional work would need consulting on. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And
so we've included it in the scope.
I'd like to ask another question, if I may, about the option to cul-de-sac Forfar Street.
Yes.
Now, I know that the consultation came back almost 50-50, but slightly in favour of the cul-de-sac. And I suggested at the meeting that we have a trial of leaving it open, but the response from staff is that, well, if you're signalising that intersection, you can't put 4 lights in and then take 1 out. It's not economically sensible, so I accept that. However, coming back to the west, you've got that slip lane from Berwick that cuts through to Forfar, that you can only take it through the left. You know the one I mean?
Yep.
Is there an option of retaining that to be open so that people can, and actually making it easier for people not to run through there, but to be able to access Forfar from Berwick?
So part of what we're doing with the there's a lot of additional pieces of work that are continuing in conjunction with this report today that are not reported in this, and one of them is all of the what is the word I'm looking for?
I'm not sure.
The speed management, the traffic calming solutions for all of the streets. So I think it's resolution 6, 7 or 8 talks about the streets that we're going to have to go back and talk to. What we can do is assess that at the time. If it's making substantial changes to the area, we will need to go back to the people in those streets and the people affected.
No, but what I'm talking about is that I think in the plan is actually to cover...
It is staying open. No,
It's
open.
staying open.
It's now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
it was in the plan to stay open.
And the other question I have is regarding, as you were talking about, the effects of cul-de-sacing. Forfar will have a knock-on effect on Francis.
And they're in the
Flockton.
resolution to go back to them.
So how do we approve the cul-de-sacing without knowing what you're going to do for those other people?
Well, there's a lot in here that there's the second stage of work that needs to go on. The
No, but it would have to be done at the same
The
time.
creation of a T-junction at the Forfar Madras intersection, Forfar Warrington intersection.
Yeah.
The creation of that T intersection needs to happen for a lot of reasons, but as well as trying to reduce the amount of traffic that travels straight through. So we are trying in all of these projects to keep the traffic on the main roads.
Yep. So
So
what are we
that's
going to do about Francis and Flockton? As soon as the cul-de-sac's in place, there needs to be mitigation there.
They will be in place, and that will be known before the Forfar is that intersection is created.
Right, so that's an assurance.
Yes.
Okay, and one last question, if I may. Moving the bus stop on Edgware Road just to the west of Madras, is that still intended to be moved?
No idea.
Because I think that's far too far a distance to walk from the other bus stops way down by Caledonian Road.
Yeah, so that's been requested by our public transport engineer, so they've selected that location for us. I can double check the spacing if you'd like.
Why does it have to be moved though?
I think it's to do with the spacing after the intersections. They want to move to get 400 metre spacing. They want to move it after the intersection as well, but I can double check all of that for you.
So it has been proposed by the public transport team.
So it's nothing to do with what our project is, it's just incidental?
We've done it as part of this project to improve the bus network, as that's come from them, but we don't need to do it as part of this project necessarily.
So was there any feedback from the consultation on that?
No, none.
Not sure. Okay. Are you sure? There's no comments at all?
Not to my knowledge, no. No.
Well, is it necessary to address that in this project, or can we pull that out and take it to the community board separately? Or is it economically sensible to do it with this?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you're sure there's been no feedback about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Aaron?
Yeah, I just got a couple of questions purely around loading, as in the number of vehicles you can get on at the peak times and where they will go. So firstly, is Salisbury Street still scheduled to no longer be one way? Salisbury in town.
That's out. Salisbury Kilmore conversion is out in 23, 24.
Okay, so that gives that time. Okay, yeah, because when you look at the design if most traffic's coming out of town on Beeley Ave, their first route is going to be Sherbourne Street rather than going down to Madras. But when you have the one-way at Salisbury, as was the original design, people will go that way and up Madras. So it's about sharing the load onto those main streets. Was the consideration given to Madras and Barbados, Madras having 2 lanes through to Forfar north and Barbados 2 south?
In each direction?
Yeah. No, only 2 north on Madras instead of 1 each way and 2 going south on Barbados.
Yes, that was considered in the options assessment. It was also considered in the last round of the DEMP, the consultation before this. My understanding was that got quite a lot of pushback from the residents and local businesses who didn't want Madras and Barbados turned into one-way streets. It also didn't necessarily align as well as this option with what we're trying to achieve. So by keeping the Sherbourne, Madras and Barbados corridor relatively simple, we're spreading the load, whereas if you start one way in Madras and Barbados, you're going to put a lot more traffic down past those residential units, which we didn't want to do as part of this. It can be done in the future, the design allows for it, but it's just not required at the moment for what we're looking to get.
Yeah, because when I look at this, it would appear, and your modelling may be different, so that's the question, is did the modelling show that you get an even spread on 3, or is it going to dominate on Cranford-Sherbourne? Because there's a good design on there, but...
Cranford-Sherbourne will get more of the traffic because more traffic wants to go to the west of the city centre, whereas Madras and Barbados will get less, but it's not like 20,000 on Cranford and 5,000 on the others. I think it's about 8,000 on Barbados, Madras, and then 12,000, 15,000 on Cranford Street. So it's fairly similar split to what it is now, just a little bit more.
And pre-quake, what were the numbers?
I don't know.
Because the loads now seem a lot lighter on Madras and Barbados than they certainly were pre-quake. And of course they carry on 50k through the inner city, so people, a lot coming from the north aren't necessarily just going to the inner city or the inner city west, they're going through the city and so on and so forth. So it's just, so the modelling showed 12.88 approximately.
Approximately.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anne and then Yanni. Anne.
Thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge the huge amount of engagement that has taken place, the effort that staff have made and community have made to come together and actually work through these issues. And I note that in 3, 6 and 7 that there will be future engagement with the community. How will that look, and what's the sort of timeline you've got in mind for that? Next steps.
Yeah, it is. A lot of the next round of consultation will be very focused on a street-by-street basis, so we're looking to do a lot more targeted, this is what your local street, this is what we're sort of thinking, what do you think? So a lot more engagement. Is that fair, Anne?
Sorry?
Is that fair? Local, more local street-based engagement. We're trying to continue the conversations that we're having with the community and try and find solutions that work for the community as well.
Thank you. Yanni.
Just 2 questions. How much do we have on budget for this, and what are we expecting in terms of the costs? And also, can you just explain why we've ruled out having a lane in the middle that would change direction based on peak flow, like a 3-lane version rather than
So a dynamic lane.
Yeah, thanks.
So the dynamic lane has been discussed a number of times with the community board prior to this. I have to give it over to Billy, but it's about safety typically.
Yeah, so we discussed it with the safety team we had involved. We had 2 independent engineers, Dave Aldridge and Ollie Brown from Stantec, come in to give us some advice, and we did discuss the dynamic lane in quite a bit of detail, as it is an easy solution almost, but there's some significant safety concerns. There are a lot of high density houses proposed in that area, or it's zoned for medium high density, so there's a lot of movements coming in and out of driveways, and then particularly around the start and end of the time when the dynamic lane's in use, we're a little bit concerned about how are people going to know which way the traffic's coming from and would it actually be safe to use. Also, for pedestrians crossing the road, it's going to cause a lot of confusion into which way are they meant to be looking for traffic approaching them. At this stage, we just didn't feel that it was safe. There's some that have been constructed in Auckland, and as they are there for a little bit longer, say in, I don't know, 5-10 years' time, we might be able to revisit this section of Cranford Street and say maybe we can fit a dynamic lane in between Warrington and Beeley, but at this stage there's just not enough evidence to suggest that it's safe.
There is also a requirement for a lot more signage, clutter and noise in the street, in that sense. A lot more, you'd need gantries, there's a lot more infrastructure needed in order to make that work. So we just felt it wasn't the best option at this point in time. It's not ruling it out, and the staff always look at it as options. As far as the cost goes, section 10 of the report highlights the costs, and at the moment the preliminary estimate is approximately 23 million, and there is enough on budget to do it. That's what's in the report.
All right, so that answers the question. Mike?
So I'm not too sure if you'll know this off the top of your head. Do we know what the total cost of the Northern Corridor and the Downstream effects are costing the council?
Costing the council, Northern Corridor and Downstream effects. It's in the order of 70 to 80 million. An NZTA, yes, an NZTA funding half of that. So that is the total cost. It then realises subsidy.
Thank you. Mike, that was everything? Yep, all right. Pauline, back to you.
Looking ahead, so with NZTA, there's a new round of the New Zealand Land Transport Planning funding coming around in 2021, is that right?
Yes, in line with the LTP.
So
yes.
that might bring back the subsidies, especially for areas that are not safe. They were prioritised in the
Yes.
GPS.
Yes.
Was that fair to say that's correct? That we would expect those subsidies to be reinstated?
Well, we haven't lost subsidy on projects that are safety based. So NZTA still has a focus on subsidising safety projects through this Safe Network program.
But they don't have any funding at the moment.
No, they are still funding them.
So we could put Courtney Street into that and apply?
If it meets the criteria for it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But that wouldn't necessarily mean a street renewal. It might mean other solutions. That's the point, is it doesn't necessarily, the street renewal doesn't address the safety issues.
Right.
Because it is a narrow street, so Courtney Street, so we will look at Courtney Street as part of the safe access to school, and we will come back and report back to the community board, but it hasn't been done as part of this report. And I believe that any solutions there would require further discussion with the community and the school themselves.
Yeah.
So we would have to come back and report to the community board.
Because I'd like to signal an amendment about Courtney Street, that we request that Courtney Street renewal be investigated in the next LTP for a full street renewal.
All right, well, we need to get this on the table, or we need to get something on the table first before we signal amendments. Okay. So is there a mover for the resolution, or Pauline, were you wanting to move an amended resolution?
No, I'll wait till it's moved.
So is there a mover for what we've got in front of us? Okay, so if we can just see the community board's recommendation. So what we've got here is the community board recommendation.
Okay.
So Mike, you're happy to move this, and Pauline, if you include your amended wording, and are you happy to be the seconder in that case?
Yep.
And that way we'll just move the resolution with the amended wording that you're proposing, rather than taking an amendment as such. It's probably the neatest way to deal with it, particularly if Mike as mover's comfortable with that.
Yep.
All right. Question, Sarah, yeah.
Thank you. Just when it comes to full street renewals, they're relatively expensive and they're done condition-wise across the city and things. Do we know where Courtney currently sits on the list of streets due for renewal?
Outside the 10-year period.
Outside,
So there are a lot
so
of
if
streets
Courtney got done, there would be streets across this. There would be a street across the city that dropped off the list to get that done.
Yep.
Yeah. And do we? Yeah.
no idea
So
what that would be.
it's so far down the list that it's outside 10 years.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
why we will assess through the safe access to schools whether there's anything we can do to improve safety
Yeah.
and access
So
in
you
the
can
area.
do things that address the concerns
Yep.
without actually having to go to the enormous expense of a whole street renewal. And is that the likely recommendation that would come back to council when there's an assessment done?
Yeah, and come back to the community board as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to address the actual concerns about safety and stuff, though, would you rather have a resolution that talked about addressing those concerns? Because if it's just the renewal, the recommendation's likely to come back saying don't do it.
No, I'd rather stick with the renewal. It was planned for 2010 anyway.
But there are lots of, so Grange Street was due for renewal in
All
2010.
right, so...
and that's, they were about to start work.
Okay, we're still in questions at the moment. I mean, if there's a question as to whether there's something that the mover and seconder are happy to include in this resolution, happy to deal with it that way.
Can you just make sure you put that bit separately then? Thanks.
So put which clause separately, sorry?
The one that Pauline just added.
So 11...
I mean, it's out of
put
scope
that-
of the downstream effect stuff anyway.
Okay, so put clause 11 separately. All right, that's fine. Okay, so we're done with questions. This has been moved and seconded. We've got the amended wording that Pauline wanted in there. So now we'll move to debate. Is there any debate on this? Yanni.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this. That'll be consistent with the approach I've taken since this project first began. I just don't believe that this is the right approach. I would much rather wait for the northern extension to have been opened, see what happens with the traffic, and then work out what we do to mitigate. I think if you look at the number of resolutions here around further consultation and engagement with communities, what I heard through the submission process is that what we're currently doing is we're penalising one area to improve the wellbeing of another area, and it's pitted streets against streets around who bears the brunt of the impact. And I'd much rather get the evidence in front of us around what actually happens when the extension is open, and then look at what mitigation's available. My main concern with this is, aside from the cost and what happens to the traffic when it gets to Beeley Ave, which is where we're trying to encourage less cars into the central city, is actually the fact that there doesn't seem to be a coordinated traffic plan for the city in terms of things like light rail, mass transit. It just still seems like we're making all these decisions in isolation without a collective and combined strategy to achieve what we want. As one submitter put it quite well in the hearing, they cannot understand why we're putting so much focus and money into making the trip from Rangiora into town quicker at the expense of the local communities who will bear the brunt. And I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. That's why I've always been against this project, and I will continue that position today.
Thank you. Sarah.
Completely agree with Yanni that the Northern Corridor extension should never have happened, and I think that if that decision was being made now, I think the council might make a different decision. However, it's a decision that was made, and we heard from the community that actually something does need to be done. We do need to mitigate the impact of the traffic coming through. And we did hear that actually many of these streets have problems with rat running already, and that much of the work that's going to be done is going to enhance the community and the pedestrian nature of it for people walking and biking around already. It's not perfect, and the reason it's not perfect is because of the Northern Corridor extension, not because of the other works that are happening. The additional traffic is going to make this area awful for many people, but that's not the decision that we're being asked to make today. So I'm going to be voting in favour of everything except 11, because actually streets like Grange Street and other streets around the city were all due to be done in 2010, and they're not on a priority list. And the street doesn't need to be renewed to be able to address the safety concerns. The renewal is about making it nice and smooth and things, but that doesn't address the safety concerns that the community have raised on it. So I won't be voting in favour of 11.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. I will be voting for this again, except for item 11. But I do think it starts and should stimulate the conversation with NZTA with regards to strengthening and put weighting on and against public transport and light rail, rather than the moronic continual planning for RONs, etc. So I think it's dinosaur kind of behaviour, but where we are. And with regards to item 11, not only Grange Street, there are a number of streets throughout Christchurch that have waited patiently because others have been in more need, but just to put something in front of those just because of this, I don't think is acceptable.
Thank you. Pauline.
Look, you know, we have used the word lemon before. We know where we are today, but I would like to really focus on the positives out of this, and I think that's very much to the credit of the community stepping up and actually speaking so loudly. And I also want to give credit to the staff for also picking up and running with the really proactive, environmentally smart options that we're now building into this in stage 1 that were not intended to be put until later. And those are all the safety issues, particularly for pedestrians and cyclists and for environmental amenity. These are going to be huge pluses out of this. And as Sarah already said, a lot of those intersections need work now. We've had the Westminster Cranford Street come to our community board several times, and we haven't managed to find the appropriate option to support the improvement there. But through this and further engagement, we will get there. That's a really dangerous intersection for children going to school. Also, Cranford Street crossing to English Park, there's now going to be a signalised pedestrian crossing there, which is going to be a really welcome addition as part of this project. We do have to focus on public transport. We do now have we will have the provision for a bus corridor going down there between south of Innes Road, but we're not going to open that. And that's as a direct result of the community speaking. Keep that as one lane at the moment. Let's see what happens, as Yanni's saying. So this is a kind of a blended resolution which I think is going to address that. We've had assurance from staff that there's going to be continued monitoring. I think in the report it says monitoring till 2031, but even more importantly, close engagement with the people who are still going to be affected by this, and particularly Flockton and Francis. And I'm going to take their word for that because I know that you are very honourable in that department, and we'll keep a close eye on that, and the community board will too. My resolution there for my amendment number 11, Courtney Street is going to be a casualty of this. I would really like councillors to support it's just saying investigate that for the draft LTP. It's not saying put it through. I think there's a good case. And by the time that LTP is signed off, this motorway will be open and we will see. It's not just a renewal. A renewal actually will address safety issues and also bring it up to an environmental standard that's going to support what's happening in the rest of that community. So a lot of the streets are going to be improved, particularly the Sherborne Cranford, but are going to have gardens and some drinking fountains and some seating. We want the same for Courtney. That's some kind of compensation for those residents having a potential motorway coming down their eastern border. So I would really like councillors to support number 11. It's only asking for it to be looked at. It's long overdue. If it was in 2010, why is it pushed out for another 10 years? So on that note, I will reluctantly support the downstream effects because I feel that we have had an incredible process here, and I particularly want to thank Anne Campbell from the engagement team, who's gone over and beyond her job expectation. She has gone out and knocked on doors if she hasn't heard from people and made sure everybody is aware of what's going on. So it has been a really good process, and on that note, I will once again seek your support for number 11.
Thank you. Yep, nobody else is indicating they want to speak, so Mike, if you'd like to close the debate.
Thanks. Look, I've never supported the Northern Corridor. It was a terrible idea. If they had stopped it at Kiwi 2 Drive, it may have had some better outcomes, definitely would have for St Albans, but the decision was made to go through the basin and put it onto Cranford Street, and I think we all knew the outcome would be poor for the St Albans community. But the decision today is not on the Northern Corridor, it's on the downstream effects management plan and the projects coming out of that. And if I believed that we could suddenly say no to everything, then I'd be pushing that, but I know it wouldn't get through council. So therefore I'm trying to get the best outcomes that we can get for the community, and the community have been fantastic in the way they have pushed us to try and get the best outcome. And yeah, it's not perfect, but actually there are some good outcomes for the community. And I think the community board as well has done a great job to get this through to council as well. So we'll be approving the walking and cycling link between the Northern Arterial and the Papanui parallel. There's going to be speed reductions within the quieter roads, the community roads in St Albans, which is going to have significant impact for safety and just the community feel for that area. It is a shame, that we've had to obviously go through this whole process. I feel for the people in St Albans who, in less than a year are going to have a hell of a lot of cars come into their community. It's already a busy area, and I think if we had just waited, actually the outcomes would be terrible. So we're trying to work out the best way to make this work. I think by the fact that we're not resolving to do the clearways, it still gives us the ability to keep pushing down the road of trying to get public transport down Cranford Street, prioritise public transport. I think this is the most important thing we need to be doing as we move forward, is how we can reduce the cars actually going into Cranford Street right from the get-go. Because if we can't do that, then we're just going to be stuffed. We've heard the cost of this, $70 to $80 million just for the Christchurch City Council part, which is obviously between Kiwi 2 Drive down to Innes Road is the main part, then obviously all this downstream effects management plan parts south of Innes Road, and that's a lot of money, really, just trying to accommodate people to get in and out of Christchurch and then reduce the impact of all the cars. And really, when we think of what could have been done towards our transport network with that money, if only we'd actually, I guess, thought outside of the square at the time this was done, we might have had some really good outcomes for our community. But unfortunately, we have been lumped with what we've been given. But I think we've got an outcome that can still work, and we'll continue to work with the community to keep making sure that we get something out of this. In terms of number 11, I support it. It's not actually putting in there to do it. It's saying it to be investigated for the next draft LTP. So I'm not too sure why councillors actually vote against that. If everyone's been down Courtney Street, you can see why it actually needs to be done. So I'll be supporting the whole resolution as it is, and I urge all the rest of the councillors to support all the resolutions. People aren't going to be happy with them. I'm not 100% happy with them, but I think it's the best we can do with what we've been given, which is not the best thing in the world. But look, I'll continue to advocate for the St Albans. Look, if I think I can say don't open it and go through,
polite point of order, Mr. Chair, for obvious reasons.
Sorry, I've got 26 seconds, so that's fine.
Can it be directed at council though, not the gallery?
Sorry, you did a point of order. I was just waiting for it to be ruled. No, it's all good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll put clause 11 first. So all of those in favour of clause 11 say aye. Aye. Against? No. So if I can have a show of hands for the noes, please. So that's carried. Do we want that recorded? Okay, so the no's again is Tim Scandrett, James Goff, Sarah Templeton, David East. So with 11 included, I'll now put the whole motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? No. And again, if we can have a show of hands for the no's. So James Goff, Yanni Johansson. That's carried. Thank you very much. And thanks to staff for your contribution this morning and throughout the project as well.